Amy Rose White, integrative psychotherapist. Thank you so much for being with me today. So let's talk about the holidays and any stress around those kinds of interactions, what they're going to be like, and how to set healthy boundaries with our families during the holidays. Now, depending on where in the world you live and your particular COVID restrictions, you may or may not actually be seeing family in person. However, for those of you that are going to have some kind of, even if it's a Zoom call, interactions with your family members around the holidays, whatever holidays you celebrate, this is for you to be able to feel more satisfied, less worried and anxious, and enjoy yourself more. That's the goal. So it's no secret that I've noticed in all the people that I've worked with, and this is true for me too, that for some reason, this time where we're supposed to be getting together and celebrating whatever family traditions or spiritual traditions are celebrated in your family, it's a really stressful time. Like, that's not a secret. Buying gifts, running around, there's a heavy energy towards the end of the year, no matter what year you're in. And people are tired, and it's dark in the Northern Hemisphere, where I live at least. And there's just a sense of kind of ready to begin again, ready for that new year, ready for relief and light. So just remember that for all of us, especially those in the Northern Hemisphere, there's just this like, oh, we're tired, we're fatigued, we're ready for a nap, like a long, nice nap and a few weeks off work. And not many of us get that, especially this time of year. So just recognize that our resources are all collectively low at the time of the holidays at the end of the year. We're all just sort of limping to the finish line, so to speak, here. And that requires and really necessitates a lot of loving kindness and compassion. There is a reason that I end all of my videos with loving kindness meditation, which is may be well, may be happy, may be at peace, may be safe. There's a lot of variations and I kind of interchange them. But the reason that I do that is because we need to nourish ourselves on a regular basis. And that prayer, that meditation does that for me. And I hope that it does that for you, because we're all, especially at the end of the year here, we're needing nourishment. That's why we crave all this comfort food and, high fat stuff, and we want soups and warm breads and all that kind of thing as we're hunkering down and kind of hibernating. There's sort of an energy of going within and emerging, as the new year begins and into the spring with a new version of ourselves, perhaps. So be kind, be gentle to yourself through the process. Recognize that you're just darn tired. At the timing of this video, I am making this in 2020. It has been a heck of a year for every single person on the planet, and we are feeling it. I can't even refer people on my wait list to the therapist that I feel comfortable with, because they are all also full. In the mental health world, we cannot reach enough people. It's actually why I started my channel. So that said, what happens around the holidays? Well, we get triggered. We get triggered because old patterns reactivate whenever we go back into that family system. And whether it's Sunday dinner, that's a big thing in the part of the world where I live, or it's a holiday celebration or a birthday celebration, when the family of origin, whether you were adopted, whether you lived with your birth family growing up, whether you had a blended family, stepkids, step-parents, however family looked for you and how it does now, those original patterns, whether they were healthy and functional or not so much, they all get reactivated when we have family gatherings. So then you add all the pressure and expectations of gift giving and acting like you like your mom's, turkey that you hate secretly, or navigating political discussions with people that you might not agree with in your family. All that stuff is just very draining, and it will trigger your old wounding. And we all have old wounding wherever we are on our path. We all can have old ouches that come up when perhaps, let's say, our parent relates to us as if we were 5 years old and forgets that you are in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 60s, or whatever it is. So that's a really important thing to recognize and remember, that those patterns and wounds get reactivated, and that leads us to old behavior patterns that show up. What does that commonly look like around the holidays? Doing things out of obligation, people pleasing, saying yes when you mean no, sacrificing yourself and sort of being a martyr, and then being resentful. What do all those things have in common? They are examples of poor boundaries. So having healthy boundaries is key to enjoying yourself more at the holidays and building up less resentment. Having healthy boundaries, a boundary is simply where you recognize what your own needs are and where you begin and end, and the others in your life begin and end. And I often draw it as diagrams. Maybe I'll figure out how to draw diagrams on the screen sometime in these videos, but I often will do this really haphazard drawing. Okay, I'm just going to do it because this is what I do for clients. So I say, well, this is you, and that's your boundary. That's your emotional, psychological, spiritual, financial boundaries. It's like what you need, what you want, who you are. And then ideally in Western psychology, oh, this is turning out great. Other people around you are close to you. They might even slightly overlap, especially if you live with them, like your partner. Slightly overlap. So there's an interdependence. I'm here, you're there, but we are the nucleus of these boundaries. Now, in a lot of family systems, because there's space here, do you see that? There's space. Like I get to have my feelings and needs. We can disagree with each other. And we still love each other, and we still belong to this family. We're separate, but we're together. In the family systems that most of us come from, there is a fusion or an enmeshment or a diffusion in the boundaries between where I begin and end and where you begin and end. And so in that system, any of my clients that are watching this are going to laugh because they've seen me do this a million times, usually not on a small sticky note. I don't know why I picked that. So those systems look more like this. They are people's boundaries on top of one another. So that diffuses the boundary. Now it's just like a mishmashy mess. And this is what we call codependence. This is what forms codependence. I'm responsible for how you feel. You're responsible for me, because we're basically kind of one rather than our own separate people that also share a common bond. So I'll get into further details about the intricacies of boundaries another day, but for our purposes around the holidays, I want you to remember that you deserve to have your own boundaries. They're part of your birthright. For example, when you're in the grocery store and someone gets a little too close to you in line, and you sort of have that, you're in my personal bubble, excuse me, back away, that feeling where most of us are pretty attuned to that when our physical boundaries are being intruded upon, especially by a stranger, but we might have gotten very acclimated to that with our family, whether there's a, certain aunt or so uncle that like just hugs you really tight for too long and you're just like, oh gosh, get me out of here. That's a boundary that we're having a hard time setting because the expectations are to just accept that boundary intrusion. Another thing that's hard to notice that's less obvious than those physical intrusions are emotional, psychological ones. Comments about your weight, how much you've gained since the last holiday function. Knowing that doesn't feel good is what informs you about where your boundaries are. So I want you to think about what bugs you the most at holidays, at the gatherings. And what is most likely to come up in you, in your body, how you can imagine feeling. That shows you where your boundaries lie. That tells you really helpful information about where you need to have boundaries in these interactions, and then it'll guide you into how to set them. So know what patterns are likely to happen. You know that thing that bugs you the most. You know that comment or that behavior or that expectation in the family. You know what's going to be hardest for you. So be aware. Going into that situation, I want you to set internal boundaries, meaning you decide for yourself what is okay to have happen and what is not okay. That might be you're an introvert and you just know that even though you have so much fun with your family, after an hour or 2 or 5, whatever it is for you, you're just exhausted and you're going to take like a week to recover from that. So your internal knowing about your boundaries that really an hour or 2 or 3, that's your limit. So knowledge is power. You got to know what doesn't feel good to you so that you can recognize what boundaries you want to set. And then the next step is to communicate them. So you might give your family a heads up. Hey, just want you to know we're only going to participate with the family dinner, at Kwanzaa or whatever on Zoom. We're not going to actually show up. That's a physical boundary. That's an emotional boundary. That's setting a psychological boundary. Or we can only stay for 2 hours, at Hanukkah. We are only going to be able to see you outside. Maybe that's a COVID-related boundary for you. So a boundary is really about your comfort level, knowing it, and then calmly explaining it. Now, you might have seen that meme, which I feel is it called a meme? I just don't really understand. I'm aging myself here, but something on Instagram that goes around a lot that I find very helpful are words that say, maybe someone can drop a line in the comments and tell me, like, is that actually a meme? I need to ask my teenage kids because they're always like, Mom, you get all these words wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, which is their job as teenagers to think I'm an idiot, but I digress. So it says the only people who will push back on your boundaries are those who benefit by you not having them. And to some degree, I would have to say that's true. That people who want to be able to hug you as long as they want, and they don't want to say like, oh, okay, well, that makes them uncomfortable and I'm still a good person and I can acknowledge their boundary and respect that, and I can hug somebody else that enjoys that really long hug, or I can, accept that other people want to spend 5 hours here versus 10 hours or 1 hour. That's okay. I respect that boundary. I have mine, you have yours. Some of your family members are going to push back and some of them won't. And that goes into, you can kind of know the health of a person's own ego and integrity and emotional development, their maturity, by how well they can handle you setting your own boundaries around such things. But that is really their issue. So for you, setting the boundary, communicating it, and then accepting that reaction, and then perhaps setting and engaging in a new boundary. That's kind of how it goes. Acknowledge, set, respond, and so on and so forth. A general recommendation at the holidays that I would like to recommend in terms of boundaries is also simply to keep it short and sweet. If family interactions are not just like the thing you look forward to the most towards this end of the year, like I just can't wait to spend 48 hours cooped up in the living room with my folks, keep it short and sweet. I gave some examples of that. I truly believe that frequent short interactions are the best way to maintain family relationships. Because we're all so different, we all have different needs, there's nothing wrong with that. And again, if you communicate that ahead of time and then remind folks when you're there, you've probably heard that phrase, you teach people how to treat you. Once you set up boundaries and you just kindly but firmly, like you would with a young child, teach people that you are asking to be treated differently. You keep reinforcing that. Generally, people will get it. Now, if they don't, and you are sort of the recipient of manipulation and abuse, that is your signal to set greater boundaries for yourself. However, I'm hoping that you will find that in the setting of some of these simple boundaries, if you haven't given yourself permission to do so, then you haven't tested that person's ability to accept and respond and adjust and adapt. And I would argue a lot of the time people surprise us. Even folks that you think are like, oh my gosh, they're never going to change. They're so difficult. She wants to know the sex of the baby and whether we're using a midwife or a doctor. That's just one I hear a lot in my office. That's a pushing of a boundary, right? Like, we don't want to share that information, or we don't really want to talk about that subject. Those are other things that you can set boundaries about. If we are loving and kind, I want to give most people a benefit of the doubt, will respond in kind and accept that and say, okay. So you cannot harm yourself by trying. I believe people deserve a chance. Now, the other helpful tip is, if you are entering a family situation with a partner or children or other family members with you that you live with, to use some kind of cue word for each other so that you can kind of communicate to one another when you're kind of done, or when you need maybe some extra emotional support, or a hand squeeze, or your partner to jump in and change the topic of conversation. You might say Marilyn Monroe, and that's how your partner knows to say, hey, did you see that, new such and such on TV or show or whatever it is? Doesn't matter what it is. If you can preempt and prepare a game plan with your family that you live with, your chosen family, that can also set you up for success in terms of just mitigating and shoring up that some of those boundaries have a greater chance of being held. Now, lastly, who is the one that gets really upset and afraid and nervous and anxious about family gatherings? It is not you, my friend. It is not your wise mind, your highest self, your adult self. It is your inner child. So what we primarily need to do is have a really loving pep talk with them before we go out into the world, but especially to these family gatherings and holiday events. And that pep talk goes something like this. I see you. I'm with you. You're not alone. I'm here, and I'm going to protect you. And I literally mean tuning in to the 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 10-year-old version of yourself that you might feel when you get activated by those comments about, why haven't you had a kid yet? Or when are you ever going to get married? Or, you should really learn how to make this too. Or whatever it is that activates you, it's likely, I'm not saying you're not entitled to those feelings from an adult perspective, because certainly they aren't particularly kind or helpful or sensitive, but the really big reaction we have, that or shut down, dissociation, freeze, flee response, or fawning, which is to try to make sure everyone else is happy all the time, those come from a deep wound in ourselves, which most of us carry from childhood. And so that person, they need our love and our attention. And when we're in those environments, if we can simply keep attuning to how they're doing. How you doing? Okay, you've noticed that your stomach is tight, throat's tight, all of a sudden your head's burning, you're tapping your foot like this. Those are signs your inner child is trying to communicate distress. And rather than try to control the environment and change anything, I invite you to simply notice, slow your breath down, and imagine your little one in your head and say, I see you. I'm feeling it. You can feel that way. I'm going to feel it with you. You're not alone. And if there's a lot of energy there, or perhaps you even feel like crying, excuse yourself, get to the bathroom, any door that has a lock, splash some water on your face, and let the tears come. Let the feeling come. Let the intensity come. Allow your body to bear witness to that inner child's plea to simply have attention paid to what's happening. Now, if you slow your breathing down and you allow that awareness to occur, then you can know what's next. Maybe that's your cue to go. Maybe it's time to leave. Maybe that's you leave. You say your cue word to your kids and they know that it's time to skedaddle out of there. And that could be true even if you are meeting family via Zoom or conference call in some way, that you are paying attention to one another. And then you set the boundary of exiting stage left as soon as possible. The key here is simply knowing yourself and paying attention to yourself and being willing to communicate the boundaries. You don't need to get into a big discussion of why with anyone here. You don't need to explain yourself or justify yourself. You just have to know. If you want to have that long talk and have your piece heard and resolve an old childhood wound with, a family member, awesome, do that. I don't recommend doing it at Christmas. I don't recommend doing it at a big family gathering or Thanksgiving. I recommend asking to have a time set up outside these holidays to do that. For now, I want you to focus on self-preservation and getting back to the nourishing traditions that actually feel good to you. What's fun to you? What is enlivening to you? For me, it's baking cookies with my kids around the holidays and giving them to our neighbors. That's a tradition that we do every year. We spend one day doing it all together. I make them deliver them in tins in December to various, folks that we know and love on our street. And that's the holidays for me. Mailing gifts to my best friends around the country. That's nourishing for me. So I want you to remember that these events, they're just a day. You can get through them. You can get through them better if you set healthy boundaries and then bring the focus back to what's nourishing you. Maybe you're a caroler person. Maybe you get really into Hanukkah and the spirit of things. Maybe you don't celebrate holidays at all and you prefer to be alone and do a personal retreat during that time. Whatever it is for you, honor that. I hope this has been helpful. Please like, share, and subscribe if it has been. Drop me a comment below. Let me know what you think about this, what your greatest challenges are around the holidays, how you may or may not think some of this might apply to you and help you as the season continues. As we get through this rest of the year, we are going to make it, people. Yes, we are. Until next time, may you be happy. May you be at peace. May you be well. Thank you.